tell me, what is it about Roger that you admire most? And where do you agree with him that most others may disagree with him? And then, okay, well, how about those two?
Roger is an incredibly creative person, and his work on gravitational topological structure, gravitation and black holes was absolutely transformative. And it laid the foundation for the book that Stephen and I wrote called The Large-Scale Structure of Space-Time. Roger has gone on to talk about the brain and to talk about conformal cyclic cosmology. And I don't agree with him in either case. And he's also talked about quantum physics, where I half agree with him. I've also written on quantum theory. I don't believe in his gravitational wave function collapse. I think that's simply wrong. And I could explain it to you, but I mean, the basic reason is very simple. And then he suggests that consciousness is based on what happens in microtubules. It's simply the wrong scale. Consciousness is based on what happens in the brain as a whole. These circuits at the whole of the integral brain, and I've talked with a lot of serious brain people, and Roger's suggestion that it happens at the scale of microtubules, that's not the scale where consciousness happens. It's simply, from my viewpoint, simply wrong. I agree with him about the problem of entropy at the beginning of the universe. I think he's got a very, very valid point that inflation is supposed to solve the problem of smoothness at the beginning. It doesn't. Inflation assumes that the universe is smooth before it ever gets going. And I think Roger's completely correct on that. Where I don't agree with him is conformal cyclic cosmology. And it's a brilliant idea, just in parallel, in a sense, with Stephen's idea of the no wave function, the no boundary proposal. In Roger's case, he doesn't actually, as far as I can see, have a mechanism from transforming from one eon to the next eon. And I don't think he has a mechanism. And the problem here is he talks about infinity, and Roger Penrose's conformal diagrams, you can look at infinity and you can see it there. But what that forgets, and I've written a paper about this, is that infinity is not a very large number. Infinity is larger than any number that exists. And a lot of physics confuses that. And so Roger has an eon and a connection and another one. And he says you get events happening here, they send signals to the boundary, and the signals come through. Well, the problem is he uses the symbol for infinity. If it actually is infinity, then any event down here gets diluted an infinite amount, literally an infinite amount, and the amount which gets transferred from this eon to next is precisely zero. There is no way, if it's actually infinite, that a finite amount of information could go from this eon to that one. And to me, this is a conundrum which he hasn't sorted out, and it just doesn't work for me.
I subscribe to The Economist. Their science and their AI coverage is among the best I've found anywhere. And I say that as someone who reads plenty of it. I'll give you some examples. They just ran an analysis on how attitudes towards science are changing in American politics and what this means for research and funding in scientific institutions moving forward. This sort of high-quality reporting is fantastic. They even covered how dark energy may be weakening over time. Now, if that holds up, it completely changes our understanding of the universe's fate. If you watch this channel, those are exactly the kinds of questions that we explore every week. I subscribe to The Economist because their science and their AI reporting regularly surprises me with how deep it goes. And they're also, of course, known for global affairs, both political and economic reporting. They are top tier, and interestingly and flatteringly, TOE is one of the only podcasts that The Economist partners with. So as a listener, you get an exclusive 35% off. That's not a deal that they have just anywhere. Head to economist.com/TOE to subscribe. That's economist.com/TOE for 35% off. Can you spell out in detail what you mean when you say that physicists tend to misunderstand infinity as a shorthand for a large number?
Yeah, I wrote a little paper called The Physics of Infinity about this, and
Huh.
physicists tend to use infinity as a shorthand for a very large number. Now, infinity is not a very large number. It's bigger than any number which can possibly exist. And so to take an example, the universe is 13.7 billion years old. It's going to be, in another billion years, it's going to be 14 billion years old. Now, when will it be infinitely years old? And the answer is never. It will never be infinitely years old. No matter how old it is, it's not even the first step on the road to infinity, because infinity is bigger than any number that can possibly exist. It doesn't matter how long you wait, how far it goes. The universe, it is always in the future. It is always over there. I'm assuming, of course, that the universe will expand forever. I regard as highly implausible the ideas it's going to recollapse, because the dark energy is far too large. I think it'll expand forever. It'll turn out to be what used to be called a heat death, which is a very strange name for something that gets colder and colder and colder. Things will decay, and baryons will decay, and there will just be this darkness left in the end. But it won't come to an end. It is never reaches the end, and that's the absolutely crucial point. And that's the problem with Roger's transitions between the eras. You never make the transition from this era to the next one if that symbol infinity means what it is supposed to mean.
Do you then not buy the physical relevance of ADS CFT, so holographic dualities? And it doesn't need to be ADS CFT. Many people say, well, our universe is not anti. Okay, there are de Sitter CFTs anyhow. So do you find it dubious because they rely on some infinity, whether it's space-like or time-like?
Well, there's a couple of things to say on that. Firstly, the trouble with ADS CFT is it obviously doesn't describe the real universe, because anti-de Sitter space has a negative cosmological constant. Now, if the dark energy is a positive logical constant, it's causative. So that by itself proves ADF-CT is a load of bullshit. It doesn't apply to the real universe. That's the first point. The second point is that the idea of holography, of course, is a very, very old idea in real-world holography, not ADS-CFT, is a wonderful thing which you can do tests in a laboratory. But in general relativity, it's what we call the null initial value problem. And basically this, which Ray Sachs and various other people did in the 1970s. You've got a null cone in general relativity. You put data on the null cone. That is a three-dimensional surface. And the interior of the null cone is four-dimensional, and it's a mathematical theorem that what is the data on the three-dimensional surface determines what happens in the four-dimensional surface. That's the null initial value problem. And then, I actually wrote a paper about this with some colleagues and the real holography is the fact that a three-dimensional surface in general relativity, data on a three-dimensional surface determines what happens in a four-dimensional space-time. That's the genuine theory of holography as pertains to general relativity. It also pertains to electromagnetism in a space-time. The data, three-dimensional boundary, the data determines what happens in the interior. Nothing to do with ADA, with anti-de Sitter space-time.